Hello, this is Alan, aka Give Me Skeletons, and today we're talking about the development of Barkside of the Moon, a game made for PixelCRAM 2025. I don't do this often, so you'll have to forgive my crispy headset quality. As someone who's been using Clickteam products since 1998, I'm always on board to promote Fusion. It is my favourite game-making platform for sure, so when I heard about the game jam, I signed up immediately. I'm already well accustomed to making games in low resolutions or in single frames, so I didn't think this would be hard to do. Since the goal of the jam seemed to be to promote Fusion to a wider audience, I wanted to tackle a genre which people would really want to make, and since I've never finished making an RPG before, this seemed like a good opportunity. It's not a genre often seen developed in Fusion, but Fusion can create anything in a 2D space, and I really wanted to demonstrate that. As it's an open source project, I promised myself I wouldn't get too invested in it, but you know how that goes. Everything becomes your baby when you spend long enough time on it. I really wanted to make a functioning Dragon Quest or Ultima style clone. That was the goal that I had in mind, and it's hard not to get attached to it, you know? Yeah, besides those older inspirations, I had Bethesda's Grognak and Wasteland minigames from the Fallout series in mind. Mechanically, those games truncate the RPG experience even further, which was good for the purpose of the jam. You'll definitely see some inspiration from those if you're familiar with them. Anyone who knows me knows that I find typical sword and sorcery fantasy kinda boring, so I tried to make something more out there. I didn't want this to look like something made with typical RPG assets, so I settled on a story about astronauts finding something which doesn't belong in space. At first, they were going to find a carnival on the moon full of killer clowns and such, but I settled on a story about finding a space animal's descendants. It seemed not as wild. I can't claim that it's a wholly original idea, though. I admit that I was thinking of the manga Planet Laika at the time, and also the Hot Dog Core story from Astro Boy, but I hadn't seen a game about either of those, so off I went. So first things first, the resolution. The one provided for the jam, which was 256 by 144, was really good for me because my favorite resolution is 256 by 192. They both divide cleanly into 16 by 16 tiles. I'm an old school guy. I've always preferred a 4:3 aspect ratio over widescreen, but yeah, there was hardly a difference. I used an existing framework, so I began development at the larger size before creating a reduced version later. I was torn between making it resemble a computer RPG or a console RPG, but since the latter is more video gamey and probably more nostalgic to a wider audience of people, and I wanted to draw in budding developers, so that's what I settled for. Next was devoting different aspects of the frame to the game. We needed the title screen, options, ending, credits, and the map, and if I'd thought about it a little bit more ahead of time, I probably could have squished some of those together. The UI for player statistics and combat are laid over the screen on different layers, and I decided to have the action all take place on a single map with no interiors. As you know, you can't have an RPG without numbers. I decided not to be too basic since I wanted to show off everything Fusion was capable of, or at least as much as I could in a month. So first came the standard attack routine. All battle participants have hit points, an attack stat, critical hit rate, and an evasion rate. Instead of initiative or speed, I just tied that to the character's level since there's only ever 2 people on the field. Naturally, levels come with experience, and there's a simple experience curve to match. Instead of measuring cumulative lifetime experience, which is the standard in most RPGs, this just tracks your current XP and how much you need to reach the next level. Functionally, it doesn't make much of a difference, but it made the math a bit easier to figure out. I decided to have fun with the setting and not just use magic. Your upgradable tools basically serve the same purpose, and also rely on a shared resource like mana, but it's called fuel points in this game. Borrowing inspiration from Star Control, you can collect resources and return them to your ship. Originally there were 4 types of resource, but these were all reduced to a single generic resource because I couldn't easily fit all of the information on a small screen. These resources can then be used to upgrade your gear. Most players will certainly finish the game with more resources than they'll ever require, but I didn't want to create something arbitrary just to have a place to spend money, such as adding a fee to hospitals for example. That felt more frustrating than fun. There are only a handful of tools. There's a stronger attack, a heal, a damage over time, and a stun. I didn't want to overdo it, and I felt like this gave players enough variety, even though it effectively meant that there's only one optimal battle strategy. So all in all, the game tracks the following, and I'll throw that up on the screen right now. One of the jam's judging criteria was, are you blown away by the immersion and storytelling experience? I wasn't expecting that, so I guess I had to put a little more effort into the story. Early RPGs were content to just send you from one region to another until you're powerful enough to beat the game's toughest enemies. A few years later, basic quests started being introduced, and those were usually just a few MacGuffins to open the final boss's lair. Those are fine, I guess, but they're not really stories, so instead I decided to draft something up like a D&D one-shot. My first question when imagining the setting was, how were you able to communicate with the dog people? So finding a translator became the first quest. That's actually a question I asked myself when I saw the first Planet of the Apes movie. Did anyone else think that? Anyone else think that was a weird thing? That they just spoke English? The first area was meant to be a place to explore and understand the game's system before the larger world opens up, but I regret to say that I didn't quite put enough content into it for the player to organically reach the required level for the first boss before finding it. Balance is a difficult thing to achieve, and a month was too short to fully iron it out. The obvious motivation for our astronaut protagonist would be finding a way back home, so that became like the main thing. But since the dog people haven't mastered space travel yet, you have to find the ruins of another crashed lander, and all of that served as the basic backbone that I built the rest of the plot from. Needing a villain, I came up with a dog military commander who wants to conquer the Earth in retaliation for exiling the first space dogs, and for that they seek to capture you so you can share your knowledge of space travel. And that seemed like a good motivation to me. An RPG consists of several different elements meeting together, so let's break them down one by one. The first thing is exploration. That is the easiest part, player movement. I used a 16x16 grid, so movement was very easy to create. You just walk around in chunks. The only additional functions needed were being able to sprint and interact with objects, which you can find all of that in the source file. There's not a lot to say there, so let's move on. Dialogue. My preferred method to implement dialogue is actually having an external script file which is then loaded into the game. That allows you to localize it into different languages more easily. Because the GEM's restrictions insisted on this being a mobile game in a compilation with other games, I tried to make this as simple as possible for the people putting it together, so everything is contained in a single frame with no external files at all besides a single save file. The script is then passed by the engine with several delimiters, including a number of calls to the engine to trigger certain events like portrait or music changes. I've invented a lot of dialogue systems before, and I'm glad to say that the one featured in this game, which I remind you is open source by the way, uses dynamic word wrapping while blipping in letters. If anything in this project can help future developers, I hope it's this. I implemented dialogue options too, and I tried to make each choice feel rewarding and unique, but honestly it's not as robust as I wanted it to be. For the sake of a simple game, it was alright, but I really wanted more contextual options. That'll be a thing for a future project. And battle, oh boy, battle. That is, the hardest thing to implement is a combat system. I decided on a 1v1 system early on, not unlike the first Dragon Quest, but I would have loved to have included party members if I had the time for it. There are a lot of things you need to consider when making a combat engine, like how do you individualize the enemies? How do you decide the difficulty curve? How different should they be to the player? And how do you keep it fun but fair? For simplicity's sake, I gave every enemy a single skill and a percentage on how often they'll use it, and as for the difficulty curve, I kept a Google sheet and I used a formula to decide how hard it should get, and I tweaked that many times. Like I said before, I didn't have a lot of time to test this, so I hope it all works, but it's more than likely that I'll need to release a balance patch in the future. And saving your game. That was pretty tricky. You see, if I was creating my own project, I would have kept all of the game's values in external INI and CSV files, and saving or loading your game would just be a matter of copying that file. But since this is supposed to be a single frame game included with many others, I try to internalize things as much as possible. And that actually caused a fair bit of work when it came to things like tracking which resource gems you've collected and which ones you haven't. But like I always tell myself, it takes longer if you complain about it, so I just rolled up my sleeves and got down to it. Regarding things that were a challenge during development, okay, the big one. I am not a musician. I'm barely a sound designer. Finding music for a finished game is always the bane of my existence. Fortunately, I happened across Yuki Nozawa's free music library, which I really recommend to anyone who works in a pixelated style and wants chiptune music. But seriously, anyone out there who can compose in chiptune, please, I'm begging you, make more royalty-free music. Us coders and artists really need it. I really want to say more about this, but I'm really exhausted. I hope you all enjoy the game, and I'm super grateful to TardiiArt for helping me with the graphics. I find art very time consuming, so that was greatly appreciated. They do commissions, by the way, if anyone's interested. Shameless plug. I hope you look forward to the next things I work on. I have a lot of projects which mean a lot to me personally, and who knows, maybe I'll make them, maybe I won't. I hope you look forward to them anyway. Have fun, and happy game making. And as always, send any skeletons my way. I forgot how time-consuming recording yourself and editing a video could be. Mad props to everyone who does this for a living.